This is A Line Around Your Thoughts, a podcast that centers on conversations with artists, writers, musicians, and creatives from around the inland Northwest. I'm your host, E.J. Iannelli. We're joined in the Rocart Media Studio today by Eric Woodard and Morgan Marie, who are founding members and current board members of the live storytelling series known as Pivot. So welcome, Morgan, and welcome, Eric.
Thanks, EJ. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you again. Yeah. It's been a little while.
It has been a while.
But, we were catching up just ahead of, before we started rolling and started talking about some of the things that I was really hoping to discuss today. And one of them is the evolution of Pivot over the years, because it's been, you're coming up and you're not too far off 10 years. 2017, right. I think February 2017 was the inaugural event. Mm-hmm. And then it's been kind of quarterly ever since, no?
Yeah, and there was a lot that happened before that, before we ever got to the Cracker Building, and that's where I met Morgan. So I'm going to let Morgan start us off, and then I'll maybe pick it up from there.
So are we starting off from the very, very beginning?
The very beginning.
From where
the
we
brainchild.
From the first idea that we ever had for this thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Take us there.
Yeah. Pivot.
Actually, can I start with one thing, and then it all started because I was approached. I teach at Lewis and Clark High School, teach English, and I was approached with the idea that Gonzaga Storytelling, the GU Storytelling Group, wanted to work with some at-risk students at Lewis and Clark on storytelling and to help them tell their stories. So they put together an at-risk group of juniors. This was at least 2 or 3 years before, so it could have been 2014-ish. And they put together a group of these juniors, and then the Gonzaga Storytelling Group would come in once a week. And Morgan was part of that group.
I was, and it's it's wild to think back that long, but yet it feels like it was yesterday in a certain sense, and that was transformational for both of us, and also the participants inside that course too. And so I was a sophomore, junior at the time at Gonzaga, and I was studying underneath Joe Albert, who was also a founding board member of Pivot Spokane and a really incredible storyteller, and created a course at Gonzaga. And he had introduced and brought us to Lewis and Clark, and that semester we got the chance to really see and witness the power of storytelling and introduce that as a new topic to these at-risk students. And in that, oftentimes, as we all know, you go in to maybe make an impact somewhere, and it has way more impact on you than you actually have on it. We both felt that in that moment. And Eric being a teacher at the time, myself being a student at the time, and we had this thought of, why does it have to stay here? Isn't there more for this? Are there more people that need the power of storytelling, if you will, at a high level, right? Yeah. And the answer was yes. And so Gonzaga at the time had an event called Story Slam, which I was the coordinator of back then. And that was a live storytelling event on campus. And it was themed, and it essentially became the first iterations of what Pivot is now. And so we would host this event on campus for students to come and share their stories. And oftentimes they'd share stories they never thought they'd share anywhere else. And on a college campus, having a safe space like that to express yourself or be able to share something that maybe you wouldn't share elsewhere was incredible. And we watched as the room would fill, and then it was standing room only. And then students continued to flood in and want to be part of this. And so we knew we were onto something there. And then we thought after that class, what if we did this elsewhere? Like, what if this happened in Spokane for people more than just students?
Instead of just on the GU campus, yes.
Yeah, and storytelling is a pretty broad term. So what sort of stories were being told by this group?
Great question. Thanks for clarifying that. Live, true stories about someone's life around a given theme. So
I'm sensing a through line here. Yeah.
Exactly. Truly it is. It's a adult version, we called it at the time. Professionals in Spokane, I think, were originally who we thought we would share this with. And now it really has become incredible leaders in our community, and anyone who has a story they want to share around the given theme, we invite them to participate and be coached now, right? So I know we'll get to exactly what Pivot is for those who aren't familiar with it now, but that's how it really began. And so before it became the official event that it is now, we created it and identified that there was something more that was people were yearning for and wanting. And now 10 years later, it's crazy to think that it's become the same event in a different version, right? We still now standing room only. You know, we don't sell tickets to Pivot. It's intentionally donation based and or free for people to come and experience. And so we don't know how many people are going to show up even now. And Eric says this better than I do, but he always has this moment where he looks around the room, 10 minutes before, 20 minutes before, we're hoping, and then all of a sudden there's this flood and this rush of people and standing room only, and make sure you get there at least an hour early now to get your seat. And we're equally excited, shocked, and grateful every time the room is full now.
Yeah, I was not aware of the prehistory. I only knew of Pivot once it had, kind of come into its own and been designated as such. But when you talk about making that transition, there was this model that you could follow that already had kind of a proven success in the Moth. But to make something, very much that was more homegrown was certainly, I think, an intent of yours to show that, Spokane could do this as well as New York City or. Yeah.
Well, not only that, we've had some salvos with the Moth and said early on, how do we get the Moth here? And I don't want to cast any shade at them, but they're definitely making a lot of money. And there are a lot of strictures if you want to be involved with the Moth. And as we were with our students, we're like, I don't know if we can do this. So my dad has this wonderful saying, ready, fire, aim. And so we just kind of said, okay, we can't align with the Moth. Let's just see if we can get the Washington Cracker Building. And we got it for a discounted rate. And we said, let's rent some chairs and let's get storytellers and let's just see what happens, right? And it was standing room only. And it was in the Inlander, and it was kind of a big deal. And really what we realized is people want to hear stories. I mean, why are we on this podcast? People like to hear stories. Yeah. And even going back when I was talking about those at-risk juniors, one of the risks is you think, are these kids going to be willing to tell their stories to their peers, to become vulnerable? I didn't know if that was going to work. And at the culminating event, we sat in a circle, and these kids told stories, and we just looked at each other like, this is one of the most amazing things I've ever been a part of, right? It was so powerful. And then we did it again with freshmen. And I thought, well, okay, it worked with juniors, but it's not going to work with freshmen, right? They're too cool for school. They're going to lean back. They're going to say, I can't tell this. And then they did the same thing. So we just realized people love to hear stories. From the time we were cave people and we're sitting around campfires, you turn out the lights, you start the campfire, and people love to hear them. And that's what we've realized over time is we are just trying to create a space where people come and tell their stories, and like moths to the flame, people just come. They do. And I used to worry that we wouldn't have enough people there, and I haven't had that worry post-COVID. It's just been, people love it.
Yeah, and from the very beginning, it has been standing room only, and I think that that's kind of testament to the success of Pivot and just the allure of not just people on stage telling stories, but also hearing those stories and being in the audience. And you always have a theme, and one of the questions that I have is how do you arrive at those themes? Do you just pull them out of a hat? Is there a large list? Is there a strategy behind them?
It looks a lot like this. Friends getting together, right? We get together as a board and we have a list. We do, and it's been a running list for a while, but whenever we have any inspiration, we'll add to the list, or we'll see something somewhere and think, that could be a good theme. So we're always trying to think of what the right theme is. And that really matters, right? Because when you center, not that we ever really require someone to like hit the nail over the head with the theme of the story. In fact, we kind of like sometimes when they don't, but it's nice to have a theme that allows for a lot of different types of stories and a lot of different people to feel that they have a story worth sharing with that given theme, right? Because we always want to encourage new people listening right now, hey, I might have a story to share. And so the theme is one of the main drivers in someone feeling that. And so it really matters.
Well, and it matters too, because if I said, EJ, tell me a story, you'd say, about what?
Yeah, yeah.
So you have to give them something to start with. So we have really, like you said, we have really tried to say, we don't care. We don't need you to be on theme. We don't need you to say the theme in your story, but it's just giving somebody something to work with when they start.
Yeah, it's kind of a prompt. And I have noticed that through my own attendance at the events, some cleave pretty closely to that theme. And you can see, I can see how this fits in. And some have only kind of a tangential relation. And it's almost work on the audience's part to see how it relates. But it serves as that prompt for the storytellers.
And I don't think anybody's ever left Pivot saying, that was a great story, but I'm not sure how it fit the theme, right? It's as long as it's a good story, we really don't care.
Yeah.
Have you ever had a theme that you felt was too restrictive, maybe in retrospect, where you thought, you know what, there were, that imposed maybe too many strictures on the storytellers, or that was too narrow?
I think we're dealing with that right now. Our theme is rivals. And I think...
And this is for the event coming up January 29th?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think people misunderstood it as kind of enemies. And I think a rival is somebody that you kind of like and makes you better and all of those things. But I realized I don't know that a lot of people feel like they have rivals. And when we were sitting around the table, we thought, I can think of these rivalries that I might have had with somebody on my sports team or something like that. But I think that one was a hard one for a hard theme for people to come up with their rival.
Yeah. And there's also, because this is homegrown and this is Spokane, there's never too many removes between maybe people who are on stage and the people that they're talking about. So if you're talking about rivals, you could end up implicating someone who's not too far across town or maybe in the audience.
For sure.
And so I can understand why some might approach it with trepidation.
And I wish we would have thought of that beforehand.
But there's also humor, and that's one of the things that has always struck me about the Pivot stories is that you'll be moved to the verge of tears in one story, and then someone will come up with this wild, utterly bizarre thrill ride. And, some of these stories have emanated from the very same speakers on different occasions. I think of Merritt Fisher, for example. So, there's an incredible, when I talk about storytelling and being a very broad umbrella, there's a lot that can fit into that.
Definitely.
And so as you're thinking of these themes, are you thinking of maybe some of the humorous and some of the more touching or poignant implications that they might involve?
My answer to that was also going to say that there has been a time that our theme has been too heavy. Right?
Absolutely.
We've chosen a word and then we got a lot of stories and then 6 stories back to back that are that heartbreaking story.
Yeah. They're good stories, but
sitting as an audience member, right? We have witnessed that on the hard side of it, the afterthought of, that was probably a theme that maybe needed a little levity to it. And so now we try to be more intentional when we receive the stories, that we're aware of where we place them and how that would feel as an audience member to receive the stories back to back in that way.
And I think you have participated in Traces, if I'm not mistaken. You've told your own story as part of Pivot.
No, I haven't told my story in Pit. Traces was a poem I wrote for the In the Neighborhood poetry project that Chris Cook was running.
I see.
And I did tell that story on video, but no, I people have said for years that I should tell a story, and I don't want to tell a story, and I didn't get involved in this because I wanted to tell a story. It's one of those things where it's like if there's something that you want to see, sometimes you just have to create it. And that's kind of what I did. I love The Moth. I mean, I think we all of us have been listening to the Moth Radio Hour and all these for years and years and years and watch the videos. And it's just like, I want to see that. And the last thing I want to do is tell a story. So I really don't. And it's not that I don't. I've told a story at an open mic because we didn't have enough storytellers. But that's not my interest, and I would much rather hear somebody else tell the story than tell my own story.
Okay, yeah, and I misunderstood that because I I'd come across a picture of you with a mic and kind of conflated that with a pivot appearance. Morgan, have you given your story?
I also have not shared a story with Pivot.
But you both do coaching, and I think that is an important component of Pivot. So you're not just expecting people to arrive as storytellers fully formed.
Correct.
And this is a huge, a really big component of what makes Pivot, is that the coaching that folks receive so that they can tell a better story and feel more comfortable on stage. What does that process involve? What does that look like?
That is probably one of my favorite aspects of Pivot is that you don't have to have it all together before you come and want to share a story with us. In fact, we invite you not to. We invite you to have that inkling or that moment of, hey, maybe, but I'm scared. Or I'd love to, but I don't know. Or I have a story, but it's really long. I don't know how to pare it down. Well, great. Or I have a story, it's really short. I don't think it's enough. Awesome. We can work with that, right? So we come alongside you to help you share that story and to identify the turning points and shape it into an 8 to 10 minute narrative that will be received well by the audience. And it's really the storyteller's story, right? We're always really adamant about that. It's like, this is your story. We are here to be like a guide on the side, right? But you lead this story. You tell us what's important to you, and we'll help identify. And all of us coach very differently, right? Each one of us board members coaches in a different way and has built our own coaching status, and we kind of, built our own style, if you will, of coaching. And sometimes we pair the storytellers with the coach intentionally in that way because we think it's going to fit really well. And other times you just kind of get paired with the storyteller and you kind of like learn throughout that process. But I always like to ask them, like, what would be most helpful to you? What kind of help are you looking for in that way? And again, they lead that. So sometimes I have no idea where to begin. I just know I want to be on this. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Let's go from there. Or I don't need much help. I'm actually really versed in this, but let me make sure it fits for the pivot stage, because there is a uniqueness in that of what we're looking for, and that's that it's true and real and told without notes and really told from the heart, really, really raw and vivid and real, as you've named as being an audience member at Pivot. There's something really special about the audience. You play a key role an audience member in the success of our Pivot events. Mm-hmm. The way that the audience holds space for the storytellers is huge too. So as a coach, you're kind of working through all of those elements with somebody so that they don't feel like they're just showing up and sharing a story without good guidance.
And when I get the story, so I get pitches from people, I'll check the email, and I know what everybody's rough story is, and I know what their vibe is. So I try to be very deliberate about who I'm placing with whom. Mm-hmm. Daniel Walters, who's a reporter, he likes to write stories. So stories that sound like they would like to write more, I send them to Daniel. So we try to be very deliberate about that. And then 10, 11, 12 days before the event, we have a dress rehearsal at the space where they're going to tell the stories. We didn't do that until recently. We used to have our dress rehearsals at Gonzaga, but it's nice to get into the space, to feel the lights on your face, to feel that microphone. So we do that dress rehearsal. We give them more notes as a group. So they will have worked with a coach up to the dress rehearsal. They will get notes that night. They will work with a coach after the dress rehearsal. So by the time they get to the event, it feels like they've got the story down pretty well. And I would say almost all the time, the stories are so much better at the event than they were at the dress rehearsal. And I think part of it is the coaching, but part of it is also it's such a great vibe in the room, and people are so supportive, and it's so quiet. We had a comedian one time. She was trying to tell jokes, and she was working so hard. She just flop sweat all over. I mean, I don't know about flop sweat, but she was just working really hard. And we finally at the end had to say, you don't have to get our attention. And she said, well, I'm so used to being in a room where I have to really command your attention. And I said, no, just be vulnerable. And her story was about long COVID and having long COVID. And I said, you don't have to grab us by the lapels and pull us in. We're right there with you. And she just said it was such a different feeling of having people just sitting there and wait, and being on your side, and you hear them gasp when you say something shocking, and you hear sniffles when you say something sad. So I think people do get that energy from the room because it's such a supportive crowd. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, and that energy, as you mentioned, with the audience and that dynamic with the audience is crucial, because just like any performing art, what you're doing is in response to some degree by the reaction you're getting. But going back to the coaching, I wasn't aware that it was a one-on-one, a dedicated one-on-one process. I assumed that it would be maybe one-on-one at different stages, but it would also be kind of a team effort where other people might, say, "Oh, I noticed this," and different coaches might bring in their area of expertise. But I would think that for the storytellers, that makes it way more comfortable because and way more intimate because they're working one-on-one with a coach.
Someone's in it with you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, as you're developing your story, as Eric just said, like stories can bring up a lot. And they can bring us back to moments and so having someone kind of work through that with you. And then more often than not, it's identifying what's really important for the audience to hear in this story, because it's often never the full story. Right? 8 to 10 minutes. And so how do we give them just enough, and that we're really intentional about that? Because if you go longer than that, you lose your audience. And so we found that over time that time matters. And so that's probably the biggest role that a coach plays, is helping them really get clear on what is the most important part and how do we tell that in a way that has that narrative arc. And, does it bookend? Right? Do we start in the beginning and then end in the beginning? Or do we start in the end and then come to the beginning? And reframing stories is really helpful for people that are new to storytelling and want to identify what is a good story. And so, we have our tips and tricks, and we have, a page of suggestions for them. And really, again, like I said, most of the work is done by the storyteller themselves. And then it's like, how do we come alongside that? Like what parts feel sticky for you and how can we help?
Yeah. And that framing is so important because you can make just an ordinary trip to the grocery store into a pretty entertaining story, provided it's told in the right way. I'm curious, and obviously I don't want you to name names, but have there been instances where the story has changed radically during the coaching process, or that the storyteller suddenly became aware of a different aspect of their story, or the crux of their story that they hadn't been attuned to before that? So you're nodding. So do you have some ready examples?
Almost every time. I mean, really, right? It's rare that we have somebody come to us with a polished story ready to go. That does happen, and it's amazing and wonderful, and we're happy to share the pivot stage in that way. But usually those storytellers are ones that are sharing stories elsewhere, or have shared it before, or have practiced and rehearsed in that way. More often than not, it's a new story. Storytelling might be new to them, or again, they get that feeling when they're in our audience. And we if you're listening right now and that's you, and you are in our audience, and you're like, could I do that? The answer is yes. All of us can be good storytellers, and so equipping them with the right tools to do that. But more often than not, it's almost always that of in the coaching process, we might ask a question and they go, "Huh, I've never thought about that,"
Yeah.
or, "Gosh, I forgot about that detail." Because storytelling, the more you tell the story, the more the details come out. When I'm first working with someone, I always say, hey, do me a favor. Will you practice telling this to 3-5 people, your friends, your family, your kids, in the car, record it for yourself. Just practice telling this, because the more you tell it, the more you'll find those details for yourself. And they come back to me and they go, I had forgotten about that. And that sometimes becomes the climax of the story.
Well, and I think storytelling it's making meaning. And I don't know if people realize that that's what it is, because you live your life moving forward and you only understand what happened to you when you look backward. And I think sometimes people haven't really thought, what does this story mean to me? What do I get out of this story? So a lot of times they know it's interesting, but they still haven't fully thought, how have I processed this? How does this tell me who I am? Because I truly believe that. And I feel like sometimes when I say words like that, it just sounds so abstract. But when you tell a story, you are telling me, this is how I made meaning out of a problem. And you and I could have the same thing happen to us, and we could tell different stories. Very different stories. You can be the victim, I can be the hero, vice versa. So you have to look back and say, and do the hard thinking of, what does this story mean to me? How does this define me in a way? And I am going to name a name because it's not a mean story or anything. Leonard Oakland, a very kind of prestigious, legendary professor at Whitworth, was telling a story for us. And he told a story about a friend who he had been very close to and had lost track of. That's the outline of the story. And he came to rehearsal and he said, and I don't know how to end the story. And so we started asking him questions. And then he said, after a few minutes, he said, well, I did go to his funeral. And we're like, okay, tell us more. And he talks about talking to, I think it was his wife, the deceased friend's wife. And it was a beautiful button to the story. And this professor, incredibly intelligent man, who had this burning story inside of him, still hadn't fully thought about what this story meant, right? So I think the process, the hard part is not figuring out how to tell the story, because once you know what the story means to you, then you can tell the story. I think it really is the thinking about it rather than necessarily the structuring of it.
But that can also be a real source of apprehension, because I think storytellers might feel the need to deliver something that is incredibly philosophical, that is laden with meaning, and always deliver that zinger that leaves the audience moved.
Absolutely.
And so that might prevent some people from stepping forward because there's this pressure to perform in that way.
Well, there's a line that I got from Josh, and you probably got from Josh Armstrong too, another board member. You just let the story stand. Just start the story. It was March of 1987. Right? Start the story. Don't say, sometimes in life things happen. It's like people want to do that. They want to say, I am adding importance to this. I am telling you what this means. But if you just tell me a story of the TikTok from beginning to end, it was March of 1987, and then where are you going to end it? What happened in March of 1987? And it's really hard to convince people that that's enough. And it is enough, because we'll figure out what you mean. If you know what it means, we'll figure it out.
So how does that fit into your kind of toolbox of tips? Because when you say it was March of 1987, I lean in and say, okay, and what happened?
Well, what I usually do is I say, cut off the first minute of this story and the last minute of this story, and you've got a great story. Because you're telling me, you're doing the 5-paragraph essay. Here's the first paragraph that tells you what I'm going to tell you. And then the last paragraph is, I'm just going to tell you what I just told you. Skip that and just tell me the story. It really is often as simple as saying, cut the first minute and the last 45 seconds and you've got a great story.
No kidding. No kidding. What are some other tips? Because you had mentioned, I think, that you give participants a list of tips just to bear in mind as they're storytelling. Yeah. And I don't want to give the game away, but
no, we want people to know these tips as they come in.
Yeah. I was going to back Eric on the same thing at the end. You don't have to then retell us what it is that you tried to tell us in the story. In fact, letting people find themselves in the story is the magic of storytelling. Because your story, we also like to borrow this phrase, what's most personal is most universal.
Right.
And if that's true, then although your personal is different than my personal, I'm going to feel your personal, right? But at the end, we tend to find that storytellers want to make sure we really got it. Or make sure it's clear, right? Or ensure that they didn't say something wrong to make sure and then we lose them. So we lose people listening. And so we really encourage people, less is more.
But I can understand people doing that because in telling stories, we want to be understood. We want to make that connection to another human being. So, reiterating the thing that you said at the outset is a way of kind of getting across to this other human being, like, do you know what I mean?
Right.
So I can understand that impulse, but then you say that can kind of detract from the storytelling process.
You know that to be true as a writer in that way, right?
Yeah.
If you tell people 5 times over, you're like, okay, we get it. Like, we're with you. We're already with you. And I think we run the risk of when somebody is with us, we actually, if we ask them 100 times, are you with us? They're like, okay, you know what? Never mind. I'm not with you anymore, right? Like a kid saying, like, are we there yet? You're like, holy cow. We'll get there when we get there, right? Another, I guess, a tip I would say, and this is borrowing another board member, Darian. He's really fantastic at helping people that are really worried about the story being a perfect version of the story, right? And memorizing it. Again, Eric mentioned this earlier. Oftentimes we'll have really good writers want to share a story on stage, but then what happens is they get attached to the words that they've written every single way that it goes. And when it doesn't come out that way, it's as if the whole story doesn't work. And that's simply not the case, right? That's why I say practice verbally, sharing it as often as you can, because you'll get more comfortable. But Darian has this awesome analogy of like, hey, when you're driving home from here on our way home, right? You know how to get home. You know your main roads. You know you're going to go down Monroe, you're going to get on I-90, and you're going to get off at whatever exit that is for you, and you know those main roads, right? You don't know what road from here until I-90. You're just on Monroe. You're not watching the little tiny side streets happen, right? Maybe you know a few of them, right? We know we're going to go past Sharp and Division. And you know what I mean? We know we're going to hit some, but we don't know exactly every single road. Same thing in storytelling. You don't need to know exactly the next line every single time. You need to know the main turns to get the story to its fullest potential. And so for people, when they're sharing their story and have this fear of my story won't be perfect, it's actually better that it's not.
And if somebody's coming to us with the idea for a story, they've probably told it before. This is something that means something to them. This is something that they think, wow, people are really going to like this. So you don't need to memorize it. You don't need to do that. And if anybody who's watching this, if there's one thing I can tell them, it's just tell the story the way you would tell it, where you're sitting at a dinner table and somebody says something and you go, oh, that reminds me of a story. Just tell it that way. That's all you got to do. And you don't have to preface it. You don't have to say anything other than, my dad called me in the middle of the night, or I woke up in the morning and my dad had called me in the middle of the night with a message and I knew this wasn't good. Right? Already, boom. Oh crap, what happened? I need to know. That's how you tell a story around a table. You wouldn't say, life can be very fickle at times, and just don't do that. What we really respond to is the story.
Mm-hmm.
And how much coaching is given to gesture? Because this is another way that that oral storytelling differs from written storytelling, or the gestures that are available to us as humans. Here I am motioning with my hands and kind of giving physical expression to my words. So do you give a lot of gestural coaching as well to underscore this? What you'll want to do is, maybe make this gesture.
I'll give you the short answer and then I'll let Maureen say no. I don't know that I've ever given anybody those tips because I just don't want them thinking. I want them to be in the moment telling the story. When somebody laughs, they're like, yeah, right, I'm going to keep going with this part of the story. I'm going to riff a little bit. The best stories really are the ones that feel a little loose. And if I'm telling you to do this, one of the best notes we ever got from the Moth Seattle is we went over and we showed them a video of us. And by the way, they said, you're doing a great job. You don't need the moth. You're doing a great job. But we showed him a video of what we're doing. And he goes, you let them hold the mic? And we went, yeah, why not? He goes, oh, don't let him hold the mic. And it's funny, ever since we made the mic stationary, people are up at the mic and they're doing all this. And it really, in some ways, freed them because they're not trying to do the stand-up thing. All we need to do is remind them to get on the mic. And it really, in my experience, it takes care of itself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, and because I think
a Blue Door Theater mantra.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Back to my improv. Thank you. I think there are certain storytellers that if that's a hang up for them, we'll work on that with them, right? Because for some people, they've never been on a stage. Mm-hmm. And so being on a stage in particular, it's like, where do I put my hands? What do I do with them? And we don't want a storyteller up there closed off, right? We know what body language like this does. So there are times that I have worked with storytellers and I have encouraged open body language, be responsive to the audience, but let it be natural, right? We don't ever rehearse it in a way of like, right there, pause, hold on, everybody stop, use your hand. That's not the type of storytelling.
Look into the middle distance right there.
But I will back Eric in this sense that that's one of the main reasons we don't want notes. And because one, notes are allowed, we become protected inside them and we become nervous about how our words come off. And also they're restrictive. Yeah. Because they just, you get nervous. And you know this to be true back in your presentation days when you were in elementary school, right? You have your little note card and we're shaking as we're holding our note card and we're trying to get it right. That our body, I do a lot of public speaking coaching outside of this work in addition. And people always say, they're like, I don't understand. When I get up to speak, I get so nervous and I lose all my oxygen and it's so I don't always sound like myself. And I'm like, well, if you're listening to the podcast, you don't know what I'm doing right now. But as you restrict your body and you start to build tension and you clench your fists, your whole body reacts to that, right? So it comes out in your vocal cords, but the energy throwing out your body is restricted and it's stopped. And so your confidence then is stopped too. Mm-hmm. And so I always say, I think one of my main reasons is no, we don't necessarily coach on specific body language, but we do coach on openness and presence. And if we're at rehearsal and we're concerned about eye contact or those other gestures, we definitely mention them. But to Eric's point, that's not our main mojo by any means.
And along with the kind of the memorization of the words and the gestures, I would much rather get up and impromptu speak for 2 minutes than try to recite a 2-minute poem. I think people think it's safety and memorization in doing that, but it's not safety. You lose your place in the middle of that poem, you need to get out your notes, you need to find that place again. And so people paradoxically think it's safe to memorize, but it's not safe to memorize. That Darien thing that Morgan was talking about, just know your turns. You know, you got 5 scenes maybe in this story. Just remember, how am I going to get from the first scene to the second scene? If you remember the order of the scenes, you've got this. And this is your story. You live this. You've told it probably dozens of times. And I think if we can just say, and the other thing is people say, I think I might cry here and I apologize. And you think that's a problem? Do you think... We just want you to tell the story the way you would at any other time. And this is the part you cry. That's what we would say with the gestures. We want to see a little tear right here. But no, it's just let it go where it's going to go. And those are the most magical stories.
For sure.
Yeah, but that vulnerability is hard. And you mentioned that at the outset in getting maybe juniors in high school or freshmen to become that vulnerable. And, you know, have you had to coach people on becoming more vulnerable and opening up a little bit more as they reach into this place to tell their story? Because I can see that being, you know, again, if I put myself in that situation, and I haven't been in that situation, you know, jury's still out on whether I will put myself in that situation, but I can see myself, you know, really bearing all becomes a bit of a challenge.
I will say absolutely yes, and not in the sense of coaching it out of people, in the sense, like, not in a I don't know, not in a negative way, in a welcoming way of, hey, if this is part of your story and you're feeling those emotions come up, that's welcome here.
Yeah.
That's part of sharing your story in that way. And Eric and I will also say that it's really critical that you're not in the story. You're out of the story by the time that you tell the story. There's a difference when you're in it. It's harder to share it from a space of clarity and from a place that would be healthy.
Well, you don't
and
know
healing.
What it means yet.
You don't know what it means
You're
yet.
in the
It's a
middle of the
great
story.
phrase.
You don't know what this story means yet because you're not done with it.
Yeah, and it's that sense making that you'd alluded to
So the
earlier.
vulnerability, like this last time I had a storyteller that he was out of the moment, but then also, like, when you touch back on it, it's touchy still, right? It feels really raw. And so there's a chance that story still needs this, like, development to be able to step away from it to kind of provide that, right? I think back to, and I'll name a name too because she'd be comfortable with this, but like Nicole Mishke was one of our first storytellers years and years ago, and she and I worked in news together. And I had approached her about being a storyteller because I thought she'd be fantastic. And I had no idea what stories she'd share. I just knew that I wanted her on our stage and I wanted to work with her in that way. And she ended up sharing a story that she had never shared with anyone ever before. And she didn't even invite her husband to the show that night because she knew that it was going to be real and raw and vulnerable and scary and hard, but she knew she needed to tell that story. And she knew that. I didn't know that. None of us knew that. And when she shared that story, it was life-altering for her and the audience and the way that she was able to share that story. And she did get emotional in it, but she was through it, right? She was looking back on chapters of her life that she previously had felt shame and guilt and a lot of challenging emotions behind. She looked back on those with gratitude and with openness and willingness to look back and say, I'm so grateful I'm not there now, but gosh, that's part of my story. And sometimes when those are chapters, like, we all have chapters we don't want to read out loud. And that's not what we're asking you to do here at Pivot. If that's not the story you want to read out loud, then don't. But there's a chapter that maybe you're willing to crack open a little bit that makes you feel seen, raw and vulnerable, but really seen. And those are sometimes those really magical stories that other people then feel open enough to share their own story or explore a part of their story that they hadn't yet been open to because someone else was willing to share theirs.
Yeah, and you had talked about it having an impact, when you were talking about the prehistory of Pivot and how you realized that it had an impact more for you than with some of the participants. And I guess that goes for the storytellers as well, where they are benefiting from this almost revelatory experience.
Yeah. It's cathartic.
Yeah.
Well, and I think those are two different types of vulnerability, because those juniors in my class didn't choose to be in there.
Yeah.
All right. And so we get people who come in and I think they're willing to be vulnerable. And I think sometimes they think they're being vulnerable, but they're trying to be entertaining, or they're trying to be funny, or they're trying to, and you realize you don't have to do all this stuff. You really don't. You can just tell us the story. So it's not convincing them to be vulnerable. It's convincing them that they think they're being vulnerable, but they're not.
Yeah.
They're still protecting a little part of themselves. They're still putting up a facade to say, look at how my jokes or all these other things. And you just have to say, no, just tell your story. Yeah. And then if they can let that fall away and tell it, what they find is, and it's not necessarily even being more vulnerable in that they're getting more emotional while they're telling the story. They're just it feels real to them. It doesn't feel like a performance. It feels like a story around a dinner table.
And you get people hooked on this feeling because you end up having repeat storytellers. I mentioned Merritt before. She is far from the only repeat storyteller, a person who has returned to the Pivot stage.
Luis Manriquez has submitted a pitch for the last 3 in a row, and I said, Luis, you gotta wait till the next season. Yeah, he's hooked on it.
Yeah, and so what is some of the feedback that you get from participants who whether repeat or one time only? What have some people shared with you about the transformation that they maybe observed in themselves?
Well, and you talked about Nicole Mischke, and we had Karen Dahl Darling, and she told a story about her husband, while he was in medical school and she was with him, was donating sperm, unbeknownst to her. And then years later, family members started coming out of the woodwork. And so Steve, her husband, had to tell Karen, I have something I need to tell you. And so her story was about that. And the hardest part of that story, I think, is she first told it as Steve's and her story. And I said, no, this is your story. I want to hear your story, Karen. Tell me how you responded to this. And that was such a magical moment, because she was like, I haven't really thought about that yet. And she said, I felt like I didn't want to impose, and I felt like this was his, and it made me feel separate. And as the family started coming together, she was part of it, and they included her, and it became a really magical moment, but she felt really left out at first. And then, so the story itself, her thinking about her story changed it. And then, weirdly, somehow her story goes viral on YouTube, and it got 1.2 million views in like 3 weeks or a month. And she will just come up to us and say, storytelling changed my life. And now she comes to open mic events, and she is all in because she made meaning, and she had been making a different meaning up until she told that story. It was the story of her and Steve. And I said, I want to hear your story. And she went, oh, that's interesting. It really is kind of a separate story. So yeah, it was really powerful for her. And I think a lot of people feel that if they're honest about how they're telling their stories, what they find is that they're reevaluating their entire life in a way and making this meaning, and it just feels so addictive because you have so many things that have happened to you, and now you're saying, oh, now I have the tools to figure out what it means and how it shaped me and how it's still shaping me. So we get a lot of feedback like that, and I'm sure you have too.
Almost every storyteller that I've ever worked with has. I was going to pull up my phone and pull a text message up from 2 days ago from my most recent storyteller that it was life-changing for him, having been on our stage. And I think it's also, I want to mention this again, like if you're listening and you're an audience member, it's the audience that we're so grateful for at Pivot too. It's the space that's held for these storytellers, because the moment that they're going through that Eric is explaining, I mean, you place yourself in that story, imagine that, right? And you're like, that, I couldn't even. And yet you have a story, if you're listening, you have a story like that too. But we oftentimes convince ourselves that we don't. and we compare ourselves to other people's story. Or what Eric just mentioned, we might have a story that happened either to us or around us or through us, and we say, that's not my story. Well, it is. There's elements of it that are. What is your story in that? And once you find that, right, then you start to unearth the meaning that Eric is referring to. And I also want to call back, though, EJ, you said earlier, like, going to the grocery store, I loved that analogy, can be a freaking rockin' story. Like, I want to put that on blast because it's true, right? We often feel that we have to have this incredible story, one like Eric just shared, in order to share that story. And I couldn't make a stronger argument that I don't want that to be the case. I don't want people to feel that they have to have that mic drop moment story. In fact, it's actually, let me ask you questions about that to go into the grocery store, right? Let's get curious about that. What was it like what did you grab for? What did you search for? Who did you make eye contact with? What was the checkout conversation? What was your drive to and from? We'll find something in there and bring that out. We'll find meaning in that.
We had a story about a woman who lost her phone on the bus. And then she found it through Find My iPhone. And she decided she was going to go to the apartment complex and get her phone back. And, you think, well, how did that end up? And I'll say, well, go to the Pivot YouTube page.
Ooh,
and
good. I like that.
you can hear the end of the story. But I mean, that's a very low stakes story, right? I lost my phone. It's not, is my marriage safe? Is my family safe? It's just, I misplaced my phone. And it was a good story. It was fun.
And we like to have a blend of those types of stories throughout so that then it feels that way, that it's not just those incredible, wonderful, full life stories, right? Because you even said this earlier, and I love that thought of like storytelling has this massive umbrella, and your story and your stories are not the same, right? Your story that you want to like have this full arc of and create that is an incredible story, and I want to hear every single one of all the people's stories, and the stories and the everyday are also worth sharing.
But at the same time, I think your stories are what make up your story.
For sure.
And you have to say, how does that small story fit into my big story?
Yep.
That's that meaning making that we're talking about. I mean, that was the thing I learned from my students is, I had a kid who had cancer when he was a kid and lost his hair. And he was telling the story about all the health problems that he had. And I realized he went from telling the story as a victim and why me to, wow, look at where I am now. And he could have told the story. And I think he had told the story a lot of his life one way. And then that story helped him change the capital S story.
There you go.
And I do think that how we choose to tell the story, there's a lot of psychology about this, about narrative psychology is what they call it, that changing how you make sense of what happened to you is an important part of being whole, having integrity in the true sense of the word.
And we've focused or ended up centering on, I think, inevitably a lot of the main stage events, because this, even in my mind, is still kind of the centerpiece of Pivot. But it was a couple of years ago that you began the more free-form pop-up style events. And now, just as frequently as the main stage events, if not more frequently, you have pop-up events as well. And so they were at the library for a little while, and you've moved locations now.
And then we were at Heritage Brewing, and now we are at Q Lounge, which is the old Bartlett, right next to 9 Bar and Bistro. And that was kind of, we needed to find the right space. The library was a great space, but it was hard to park. Heritage was a good space, but it was kind of a shotgun shack. So it just wasn't the best place to watch. So we just really were struggling to find a space that we felt worked for what we were doing. And Q Lounge has a stage, it has a sound system, it has a full bar, it has food next door, and Kitty, if you know Kitty from 9 Bar and Bistro, is just a gem. So she's been great having us there, and we're trying to build it there, get some momentum. And our last event was really fun.
And that was on December 10th, if I'm not mistaken,
Sounds
about
right.
the holidays.
Yeah.
An appropriate theme.
Right.
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 But this, to me, should have a lot of appeal to people because it's a lot lower stakes.
For sure.
in many respects. You're not under the Washington Cracker Building spotlight with a massive audience in front of you. You're under people who are maybe a little more forgiving because it's more spontaneous and impromptu. So are you doing this to kind of allow or provide an opportunity to those types of storytellers who might be more inclined to go when the stakes are a little bit lower?
Partially, we're trying to appeal to a little bit younger demographic because the pivot main stages tends to be, I mean, I'm not throwing shade, but people my age. And so we're trying to think, what is
Well, they have more stories to tell. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to think, how do we get more younger people to show up and make it more of an event, make it a little bit more freewheeling? And then also we've seen storytellers from that event who end up on our main stage. We had a storyteller come up on stage a couple of times ago, and he was talking about when he was in prison and working in the laundry room. And you're like, and when you see him, you're like, what were you in prison for? Come on. And he gave a little aside. He was like, I was in prison because I got involved with some rebellious nuns. And that's all he said. And I'm like,
There's more
that
here.
both answered and didn't answer my question. So part of it is, too, we just say, let's make it freewheeling, let's make it fun. And my favorite part of the night, too, is we have an intermission and we say, hey, if you were inspired, if you thought of a story during this time, put something in the hat and we'll pick you out in the second half. So a lot of times people show up thinking, I don't have a story, I'm just going to watch. And then they think, actually, that reminds me of a really great story. So that helps too, because it makes people realize, well, Salmia, she's one of those who's addicted to Pivot right now. And she came with her husband, and I've never spoken to her husband before. And then she gets up and tells a story. And then before we know it, her husband's up there and he's telling a great story. And he's like, I did not plan on being up here and doing this, but I decided to do it. So it does, I think it makes people in the audience think, oh, I actually do have a story.
But it's like you said, some of the most natural storytelling arises out of the reaction, oh, that reminds me.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so how have the pop-up events, aside from changing location, have they changed in their flavor at all? Or is the model, has that remained pretty consistent since they were implemented?
Were you at the last event?
Not the last one.
Okay. One of the things that we've decided to do is with our new host, Ani, who's our newest board member as well. At the end, she asked them a couple of questions at the end. So maybe there's something that wasn't clear. Maybe we want to find out what happened at the end.
The rebellious nuns, for
Right,
example.
right. Well, we hadn't done that yet, so we didn't have the opportunity. So she gets up and decides, I still have a couple of stories about this. I want to know a little bit more. So as a proxy for the audience, she kind of gets to say, tell me a little bit more about this part that we missed, or and she's just a natural at it. So there is that moment where she asks a question and go, that's a good question. I can't wait to hear what they say about that.
So
It's
a little
supposed to be a
Q&A
little looser
portion.
of a format
A
in
little
that
bit,
way.
yeah. And one of the things that I'd like to see, and I don't know if Ani feels the same way, but I think it'd be interesting if the audience could ask some questions too.
Yeah.
Say
That could be really dangerous.
it could, and it could take forever. And I don't know, that could be ceding too much control of the stage a little bit. But yeah, it does feel looser and it feels more fun. And some of the stories are great, and some of them are like, that's all right. It was open mic.
Yeah, and so the next main stage event is Rivals, and that's coming up in late January. And then almost just a few weeks after that, in time for Valentine's Day, there's Love Stinks.
That's right.
And that's going to be a pop-up event. Now, do you have any idea who is going to show up to these pop-up events, or is it just as spontaneous and unknown for you as it is for some of the storytellers?
Spontaneous, unknown, and please come. We'd love to see you there. It's still building, right? We have a really loyal audience that comes, and again, we've mentioned that standing room only. We're always so grateful, and we're building this pop-up audience, and we would love new people to come and experience storytelling. And it's lower stakes in that way, and that's the intent. It's meant to feel like an open mic of sorts, or come grab a drink and support a local business, hang out with your friends, and then get inspired by storytelling to either share your own, or maybe someone else that you think would be good to come and share a story, right? So it's really meant to just be this connector, community connected event.
And we'll have a DJ, so we have some music beforehand, music between storytellers, and you can get a drink and you can get some food, and it just feels a little bit lower stakes, shorter stories. They're 5 minutes long. So it does feel.
Otherwise, the cane comes out
Right,
and
right.
makes them have to
Well,
stay.
yeah, we haven't had to do that yet, but and I just will say, if anybody wants to know what we're doing, pivotspokane.com. It's just simple. You can get on our email list, and we won't sell your email address because I wouldn't know how to do it if I wanted to. But yeah, we'll send emails to remind people of the events coming up.
Yeah, and the fact that you do have the video component now, because again, I think video is really key to a lot of these stories, and seeing the individual who's telling the story. And of course, I think we're in a more visual milieu right now. You know, everybody tends toward video. Yeah, but the fact that you make these stories available and they can get 1.2 million views is
Yeah, we haven't had anything close to that since.
Yet.
We were hoping, but
so there's Rivals, and then there's Busted coming up in April. So that's going to be the next main stage event. Have you already started getting some solicitations for that?
we have an embarrassment of riches for pitches for that one. I think we have 9 pitches that I'm currently trying to whittle down to 6.
Okay. More for Busted than Rivals.
know.
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so to your point, the theme does matter.
Yeah.
And we do take a lot of thought on that. And so we'll reflect back as a board at the end of the year on the themes and hopefully, be able to make some strong suggestions for the next year. But it's you never really know, right? Like it's hard to anticipate to what Eric said earlier. You never know how someone's going to interpret what the word is.
Well, and as a marker of our growth, when we first started Pivot, each board member had to go out and find a storyteller. We just weren't a known entity enough that people would come to us. We had to go out and solicit, Morgan, who's your storyteller? Eric, who's your storyteller? And now we generally don't have to do that anymore. All of these 9 storytellers came to us through coming to the events and us saying, hey, these are our themes for the year. So if you have a story for this theme, send us a pitch. And so we are in that position now where we don't have to hustle to do that. People just say, I've got a story, which is great for us.
Yeah, and that I think explains one of my initial questions was how has Pivot evolved? It's certainly become a lot better known, and so it's nice to not have to go out and tap people. Yeah.
And the other thing is that how it's evolved, how it hasn't evolved. We've talked about, should we move out of the Washington Cracker building because it's standing room only all the time, right? But it's just such a great space.
That space works.
We love
That
the
space
space.
really works.
And they're so nice to us.
They've been so good to
Yeah,
us.
they're so good
And
to us.
the intimacy that you can have in a space like that, you might lose in a bigger venue. We talk about how that audience plays such a key role. You can see the audience, you can feel the audience. We've all been on bigger stages like that where you start to lose that. And there is, a little like on the side, at some point we are open to something bigger. We have always had that. There's a thought, who knows what we could evolve into in that way. But right now, I like what Eric said, what we haven't, like we know what we do really well, and we know what works really well in this way, and we know what our audience responds really well to, that then protects the storyteller, right? Because that's what it comes down to, is we want to make sure their experience in sharing a story on our stage is going to be one that feels really good. And right now, we know that space is going to provide that.
And then we've said, do we need to sell tickets so that we know everybody has a seat? And we're like, that's just an extra level that we don't need to worry about. And we've always covered our costs. We pay for video, we pay the DJ, we buy gifts for the storytellers. So we used to have to rent chairs. We finally bought our own. So we do have costs, but people have been generous enough that we've never had to charge for it. And we're like, why? You want to grow, but you don't want to mess with a good thing. So we have evolved in, I think, positive ways, but we've just decided let's just stick with what we know works for now.
And we are a nonprofit too, in that sense. And that's like such an important part of the work, is that we want to make sure that the money goes back into the community and into the arts and into supporting, like Eric just said, we hire the DJ, we hire the video, everything local in that way, to ensure that kind of keeps that cycle going and keeps people finding us in different ways and wanting to be involved. And we welcome that part. And that's like a key thing in the decision not to sell tickets in that way, and to be donation based, because then we allow people to come whether they can or cannot donate. And some people make up for the people that can and can't, right?
Somebody
And
threw in a $100 bill last time.
Yeah.
It was like, great, thank you. And then some people, college students, walk in and we're like, great.
Happy you're
we don't
here.
care. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that next leveling comes with its own pressures as well.
Yeah.
So, the model works, and I think there's a lot of comfort in that. But yeah, even to your point about the space working, like the warmth of the brick, it might be lost in a more, kind of dedicated performing arts space.
Right.
So, yeah.
And the thing we did, I think this year might have been the first one, it might have been last year. We used to only have 3 main stage events, and we said maybe it'll take the pressure off attendance if we have 4 events a year, and it hasn't taken the pressure off attendance, which is fine. But
Good problem to have.
and maybe we'll go 5. Who knows? So yeah, it's just been a thing. If the evolution is just getting more stories on the stage and having the same standing room only, it's great. So yeah, things have been working really well, and we just wanted to keep going.
Super grateful.
Cool. And we will keep going. This interview invariably segs into another portion, and that is the lightning round. So every one of these, I like that. If
Here
you
we
weren't
go.
aware of it, I like that surprise.
Yeah.
I was not aware, but I like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we're just coming off 2 episodes that were for the holidays that were lightning round only. So I
Oh.
thought more people would be aware of the lightning round
Okay.
and what it contains.
Here we go.
Which is 4 completely random questions. And it always begins with an either or. So Morgan, I'm going to start with you.
Let's go.
So this is your either or: a noisy neighbor or a nosy neighbor.
Noisy.
You'd prefer noisy over nosy.
Yeah.
Okay. So you'd rather they disrupt your sleep rather than pry into your affairs.
Yeah, because I'm loud. If you're my neighbor, you probably think I might be.
Oh, so
noisy
you
neighbor.
are the
I
noisy
could be.
neighbor. Okay.
I could be. Have you heard my voice right now? I don't even need a microphone.
Eric, same question.
Nosy.
You would prefer nosy.
I
Okay.
could tell him to just where to stick it. I would be fine with that.
See, I don't think I have that. I don't have that same skill to be able to say.
I could tell him to talk to the hand, but yeah, earplugs can only cover so much.
Yeah. I'm with you on that. The nosy, you can kind of keep at bay.
Am I
The
unique in that
noisy.
answer? Is it usually nosy?
No, it's a different either or every time.
Okay.
And so this was unique to you.
I have
too.
an either or for you if you're willing
Ooh.
when we're done.
Okay, sure. I've never had the lightning round flipped back on
Oh,
me.
yeah.
So I guess there's a
we like
first
to do
time
things
for
different
everything.
around here at Pivot.
So I'd like to know, we've talked about, moments of revelation and epiphanies. I'd like to know an epiphanical moment for you. Eric, I'll start with you this time. That came in a book or a film or a television show. Something that was transformative in its own way.
Sure, that happens to me all the time. The last book I read, it was I think it was called Deep Survival. It was from a book club, and as I'm reading the book, it's about why do people who are stuck on mountains survive? Why are people who are lost at sea survive? And it's really the psychology of survival. And as I'm reading the book, I thought, there's only a matter of degree difference between surviving being lost at sea and surviving your life. And I just was having this sort of incipient thought of all it is life distilled, right? Mm-hmm. And then he said it right at the end, and he said, you can't talk about survival until the person has completed their life, because survival begins from the moment you're born and it ends at the moment you die. And you don't know if you're a survivor until you're done. You might have survived one thing. You might have survived a cancer scare. You might have survived the loss of a spouse. You might have survived the loss of a child. But you don't know if you're a survivor. Survival is a habit of mind that is a matter of character. It's not an event that you get over. It is a character trait, and you'll know if you're a survivor at the end. And I read that, and I dog-eared that page, and then I dog-eared the dog-ear. And I was like, that is a really good way to think about living your life, is about how am I a survivor? So.
Well, I do have a spoiler alert for you. None of us makes it out at this point.
Dang it. Oh, dog-ear's gone.
I was so entrenched in his answer. Let me think about mine.
That was a good story, wasn't it? Yeah.
Come on. You sure you don't want to share a story on our stage?
Yep, I'm
Come
sure.
on. I think that I might be inspired by that answer with mine, so we're going to roll with this, that my husband and I have been watching Survivor a lot recently. And last night, during one of the episodes, so this might be not my most profound answer, but I'm going to roll with what I'm feeling right now. During the finale last night, they put you on, there's a jury, And there are 3 people that are in the running to be the final winner of the Survivor. I won't give anything away. Don't worry if you're listening. But the jury is in charge of deciding who wins the $1 million. So they've gotten as far as they've gotten. There's 3 people left, right? And the jury is supposed to ask them these questions to why they deserve the $1 million. And usually they ask questions like, what was your best strategy? What was your best gameplay? What was the thing you did to get here and why'd you do it? Or what was it about your muscles or your strength or your strategy, right? And one of the women last night, instead, she asked one woman in particular on the 3 finalists, she said, I want you to name a family member or someone that somebody cares about on each member of the jury. And the gal couldn't. And it showed, right, her gameplay was strategy specific and maybe not as relational. And that just hit me in a sense of, I wonder how many people, like, could I name, Eric's spouse, could I name Karen immediately? Can I ask when I call Eric to talk about a board, something about pivot, and I say, hey, Eric, like, can't wait to see you here at Rogue Heart Media for this, just checking in, like, how extra special it is to say, and how's Karen? Mm-hmm. And to name her by name, because I know that Karen matters to Eric, so then Karen matters to me. And I loved that thought last night for myself. I went to bed kind of reeling in that of, I work with a lot of people often in that way, and I wonder, have I thought to ask that additional question, or have I thought enough to think to keep a good enough track in my head of the people that they care about too?
Yeah, so maintaining that compassion, throughout all aspects.
Yeah, well, yeah, and also in caring about things beyond, or caring about the person what they care about, or just making sure people. I mean, our world moves really fast these days, right? And so
much of it is transactional, and that helps that backslide or prevents that backslide into a very transactional.
Well, and you notice it too, right? Like, you can probably even think right now, if you're listening and you think about, like, who has asked you recently about someone else in your life, or something about how your kids are doing or how this is, but really intentionally cares about that. Mm-hmm. You feel cared for and heard and known and seen. And if we're talking about storytelling, that's the core of why stories matter, is they help us feel connected.
Yeah. You kind
this
of
is the slowest lightning I've ever seen.
No. See, this is the great thing about the lightning round, is that I guess the questions originate very quickly, I suppose, or are slightly more rapid fire. But I love the digressions and
good.
We're not failing this test. We're doing okay.
Not by any means, no. It's sometimes the long digressions are the ones that are the most revealing, like you find with storytelling.
Yeah.
You had mentioned this. You almost anticipated this question. You talked about when you were falling asleep last night. When you have trouble falling asleep, what are you generally thinking about?
Oh my gosh, are you sure you want that answer?
I do want that answer.
Okay.
We're getting a little personal here, but
what are you thinking about because you can't fall asleep, or what do you think about in order to fall asleep?
Oh.
You know what? I'll leave that open to interpretation.
Okay.
Yeah. So maybe there's something that you find incredibly reassuring. So when you're brooding on something, you think about
someone
X,
tell
Y,
me
or
what
Z,
that is. If you have that answer.
Oh, I have one. I'll tell you when you're done.
Oh, fantastic.
Eric can solve my first answer, which is my to-do list. It runs rampant through my head. And I'm like, not right now. Like, I don't need to know, but I do. I don't know. I cannot shut it off. And sometimes I can literally see the things flashing through my brain and keeping me up. So I have some work to do with that.
Yeah. And the thing is, what increases your anxiety is knowing that your to-do list is preventing you from sleeping, and if you don't get enough sleep, you won't be able to do the things on. And so that creates that wonderful spiral, at 2 a.m. Mm-hmm. Eric, how do we get to sleep?
Well, first I'll tell you, generally when I have trouble sleeping, I'm thinking about solving a problem with students, whether it's it could be attendance, it could be whatever, and it's usually not that they're being rude or disrespectful. I'm just like, how do I figure out this kid? Mm-hmm. So I generally don't have a hard time sleeping when school's out. In the summer, but I'm just always thinking about my students, just because you've got 150 students and there are a lot of problems to solve, and you can't do them all. So I'm just always trying to think, how do I help this kid? I've found that a really good way for me to fall asleep is to pick a large number and to count backwards by sevens.
You do not.
Okay.
Yep. 591, 584. 577, and you just go backwards.
Oh.
And it's by sevens. Sevens is the only number. I mean, you could probably pick a larger number, but and if I lose track, I got to start again. And there's something about just getting involved in a task that requires attention, but doesn't require too much thought.
Did you
really
come
works.
up with this?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think I read it anywhere. I just needed something to hang my brain on to stop thinking about the other things. But a large number count backwards by sevens.
See, and these are, this is the life wisdom that you get in the lightning round that you might not necessarily get during the core interview, and opens up all these paths.
I can't wait for tonight. I can't even count. I mean, math is not my strength, so this is going to take me a long time.
You can't think about your to-do list because you're thinking about how do I count backwards by seven.
So finally, speaking of going to sleep and storytelling, what was your favorite bedtime story as a child?
Goodnight Moon.
Okay, you don't even have to wait. Goodnight Moon. Okay.
Goodnight Moon.
So just to tease that out a little bit more, what about that story appealed to you?
It's the only one I remember we read all the time. No, it's funny. I give that gift as now when my friends have children. It's like the first thing I'm like, okay, I know it's an easy one. I know it's good. I know what it does. I know what it is. And there's just something comforting about that. Maybe it was the fact that the person got to sleep at the end. Maybe there's something I still need in that book. Maybe I should whip it back out. Maybe that's my answer. I gotta whip out my own Goodnight Moon book back.
Yeah, and giving it as a gift has that sentimental dimension as well. So
I have two. One is called What's in the Dark. Do you remember that?
No.
Oh, it was a kid laying in bed, and the question was, what's in the dark? And the book went through, and it just showed that there was a garbage truck out there in the dark. And there were clothes on the clotheslines out there in the dark. And it just had photographs. And it made you less scared of things that were in the dark. So you were outside in the dark and you realize, oh, it's kind of the same things that are in the light, but it's what's in the dark. So I still have that book somewhere. And I wrote on the inside, Eric J. Woodard III, and I'm not the third. So I don't remember writing it, but I thought I was really trying to level up at that point. So I still have that. And then the other one I still have that's falling apart. I need to find a copy. I was born in Alaska, and there was a dog sledding book called A Puppy Named Guy, G-I-H. And it had the most beautiful art. It's like this pointillistic. It feels almost like, what's the Christmas book with the bell? Polar Express. You know how it's got that kind of pointillistic thing, but it's even more abstract. And it's about a little puppy who wants to be a sled dog, and there are these the graphics, the art is so beautiful. And of course he grows up, he becomes the lead sled dog. So it's just a cheerful story, but I just remember that it's in my bedside table, and I need to find another copy because it's just falling apart. But yeah, Puppy Named Guy was one of my favorites when I was a kid.
Okay, so Puppy Named Guy, and counting backward from from a high number by sevens, and there's your who needs valerian tea?
Yeah, I generally, knock on wood, don't have a hard time sleeping.
Okay. Well, I need to follow.
You and me both. Yeah. That's the next podcast episode is listening to all this going,
Well, cool. Eric and Morgan.
Oh, I did have one.
Yeah, that's right. Let's go.
I thought I might escape that. Okay.
If you have a choice, you could have somebody come over every night and cook you dinner. You have to buy your own food. You have to clean up after, but they'll cook it for you. So you can choose whatever recipe you want, but you have to buy your food, do the grocery shopping, and clean up. But they come over and cook, or they come over and give you an hour massage every night. Oh. Which would you pick?
Well, I can do the cooking myself, so I would opt for massage. Yeah.
I second that answer.
You'd be surprised at how many people choose the cooking.
Really?
I think, yeah. And it's weird because they have the same kind of response, but an opposite reaction to that. They say, I cook all the time and I'm tired of cooking. And you say, I cook all the time, so I can cook.
Yeah, I actually get a lot of joy from cooking. And so I would probably opt for that, or I wouldn't want to cede that to someone else.
I'm with you both. I'm telling you. Absolutely. Massage every
Well, we're all in agreement around yeah,
a
reverse lightning round question. I love it. Well, cool. Eric and Morgan, thank you so much for coming in today and talking about Pivot and all of this.
Thank you so much. And if you were listening and you're interested in sharing a story, we welcome you. I mean, pivotspokane.com, as Eric said, but also just be open and willing to hear that you do have a story worth sharing. and trust that instinct and know that we're an open door, and we'd love to help you figure out what that looks like, whether it's a pop-up or a main stage.
Cool.
Perfect.
Awesome.